All right, welcome everyone to the Transportation Seminar, University of California, Davis. We're extremely pleased that our speaker today could take some time out of one of the busiest schedules that I'm aware of on the face of the earth. And we'd like to welcome Tony Tavares, the Director of the California Department of Transportation. I'm not going to give any more intro. I'll let Tony sort of tell his life story as you weave it through what's going on. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this invitation to come over here and speak with all of you. I'm Tony Tavares, as Professor Harvey mentioned. I'm the Director for the California Department of Transportation. And a little bit about myself. I've been with the department for a little over 3 decades now. Started, I'm an engineer, I'm a graduate of UC Davis, so it's really fantastic to be back home with, here at the university with all of you as well, to share some of our experiences and share where Caltrans is moving forward as a new transportation agency. I would say a newer vision for a transportation agency. So a little bit about me. Been with the department, as I mentioned, over 3 decades. I've worked as an engineer in the bridge department, designing bridges and then highways, and then from there moved up into mid-level management positions. When I met Professor Harvey, it was when I was the director for the division of maintenance out of Sacramento, and I was able to work very closely with him on a lot of different pavement issues, and really appreciate the partnership we have with UC ITS and UC Pavement Research Center as well, and all the work we've done together. I did that role for about just under a decade, and then from there I went out to the Bay Area to be the Bay Area director for Caltrans, overseeing the 9 counties in the Bay Area. I was there for a couple of years when I was asked to go down to Los Angeles and take over that large district, Los Angeles and Ventura counties. I spent about 3 years there trying to get the whole transportation network ready for the LA 28, the 2028 Olympics that are coming to California. And while I was doing that work, I was fortunate enough to receive a phone call from Governor Newsom asking me to come up back to Sacramento and take over as the director of Caltrans. And so that's kind of a very quick tour of my 3 decades, but very honored to be in this role. And so let me share you a little bit about where we are at Caltrans. So I think what really makes an organization, first you have to understand the past. And all of us, we've been going through this pandemic, we're coming out of it, I hope. But during that pandemic, we saw social unrest throughout the nation, throughout the world, throughout the state. And it made us really look back inside of our own selves as humans and individuals and understand, what has the transportation system done to people in California? And so we were understanding that past. We had our teams, our executive teams, actually watch divided highways. And it's a documentary just showing how some of these highways were planned from the early 1900s, the concept of redlining. And that led to us wanting to make a statement as a transportation organization and develop our own equity statement. And we developed what we call the 4 Ps of equity to help guide us when it comes to equity. And that is, the first one is people. The other is program and projects together. The other is partnership. And the 4th P is the planet, understanding that we need to ensure our environment is kept in good condition. So that's kind of our present, and we're looking now to the future from being more than just a highway-centric organization, but really being a transportation organization, which includes active transportation, walking, biking, includes the use of transit, buses, light rail systems, commuter rail systems. So we're engaged in all of that now, and also the movement of freight by rail, and how do we establish clean trucks on our network to move freight. So how do we do this? We developed 2 very important guides for us with our teams. and external input into it. First one is the California Transportation Plan 2050, which lays out our vision for where we want transportation to go by 2050. And it's very visionary. It's not budget constrained. So it's everything that we want to see. We want to see zero emission vehicles. We want to see more rail connectivity. We want to see more multimodal transportation options out there. And how do we do that? We do that with our strategic plan. So it's a 4-year plan, the strategic plan that helps us incrementally get to where we want to be in 2050. That strategic plan lays out our vision for Caltrans. It lays out our mission, the values that we have, and our goals moving forward. So at Caltrans, we have what we call our 5 priorities of safety, modality, innovation, efficiency, and partnerships. And those are the framework that we do our work in every day. And with that, we've also established what we call our 4 foundational principles, or our core 4, which again, safety is in there. It's both a priority and a foundational principle for us. We have equity, we have climate action, and economic prosperity. And so I'm going to touch on these 4 in a little deeper. So safety, just to share with you, in 2021, over 4,200 people died on California's roadways. 4,200 people died on California's roadways. That is almost 12 people per day dying. That's families, 12 families being impacted. 12 moms or dads or brothers or sisters or sons or daughters not coming home. And 3 of those 12 people are our most vulnerable users, people who walk, bike, or take transit. And so these statistics are getting worse and worse every year. In 2020, it was 3,600 people. The numbers keep going up. So we have to make a change, all of us together. And we've implemented what we call as a safe system approach. And what that does, it has some very specific strategies in there, but a couple points I wanted to share. One, that humans make mistakes. We have to understand that as engineers, as planners, as people working in transportation policy, we have to understand that humans are going to make mistakes. And how do we design a system with redundancy so that these humans who make mistakes don't suffer a fatality or a serious injury? We also understand that humans are very vulnerable. So a vehicle to human contact is likely going to result in a very serious injury or a fatality. So we have to understand that as, again, engineers, planners, policymakers. But a point here that I think also needs to be shared is that safety is a shared responsibility. Both the user of that transportation system, that transportation option, but also the owner, Caltrans and others, have to take responsibility for safety as well. When the governor asked me to be the Caltrans director, it was June 23rd. I remember it very clearly, obviously. Unfortunately, June 24th, I was attending a funeral for one of my own employees that was killed on the highway, just outside of Davis, near Vacaville on Interstate 80. A little more than a month later, I had another employee killed down near Fresno. And in September, we had 4 contractor employees hit by vehicles. 2 of them died. 2 suffered life-altering injuries. Something has to be done with it. This is not acceptable as far as I'm concerned. So you as leaders now and educators, and you're going to become transportation leaders or in the field, I'm asking you, it's a call to order for all of us, our construction industry, everyone in California and the nation. We have to do something different. People have to slow down. They have to stop driving impaired and stop driving distracted. Put that phone down, that text message, that whatever it might be. So we're going to do our part. This is a slide of one of our safety campaigns that we are running right now. It's called the Kids of Caltrans. And these are real parents of these children, but also employees of Caltrans who are out on the roadway on a daily basis. It's trying to get that human side to the public, that our employees have families just like all of you. You want to go home to your family at the end of the day, they do as well. And so I think it's been extremely impactful. We've received a lot of good press on it, if you will, and I think it is making a difference, and I hope so it will continue to make a difference. Talk about equity, and as I mentioned, during the pandemic, we established our own equity statement, and we were very passionate about that and wanted to make changes in Caltrans. So it's not, equity is not just a term we're throwing around. We're actually trying to implement that in every aspect of the work that we do. We're engaging communities on a regular basis. We're bringing them in to help us plan, design our projects as we go forward as part of our team. And so it's so important that we do that, but also in our own workforce and hiring practices. We're being very deliberate and going out to all universities, but being very deliberate and trying to recruit women, people of minority descent, and bringing them into our organization and showing them how and what they can do for Caltrans and what they can do for the people of California. Essentially, what we want to see is that our entire makeup of our organization resembles not only like the people in this room, but resemble the people who live in California. So that is one of our goals to achieve as well. We were having a discussion before this, and I mentioned when I look at my executive team, which is over 40 members, 75% of that team is either a woman or from a minority area. And so that excites me, because when I started Caltrans 3 decades ago, did not look like that. It had no resemblance of that. And being of Latino descent, I would have never had the opportunity back then to achieve what I've been able to achieve today. So it's a goal of mine to continue ensuring that equity is included in all that we do at Caltrans. Climate action, I want to talk about that as our third foundational principle. Caltrans and the California State Transportation Agency and many advocacy groups around the state and other stakeholders came together to develop the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. And it is a guide for us on how we are going to put transportation funding, what types of projects we're going to fund and allocate throughout the state. And some of you have heard of SB 1, Senate Bill 1, the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. There are two specific programs in there. One is called the Solutions for Congested Corridor Program, and another one called the Trade Corridor Expansion Program. Those are our grant application type of projects. So cities, counties, regional transportation agencies, and MPOs apply for that grant money. We are now applying the provisions of CAPTI to those projects, those grants that come in. And if projects don't meet the criteria that is in there, such as reducing VMT, vehicle miles traveled, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, providing for more infill housing development, things of that nature. If they're not meeting those specific goals, those projects are not getting funded going forward. So we're really changing the way we're looking at transportation. I mentioned vehicles mile traveled. So SB 743 is a law in California, which is the impact of it is really to reduce greenhouse gas emissions throughout the state. And we realized that 50% of all the greenhouse gases in California are coming from the transportation sector. So our goal is really to try to reduce those single occupant vehicle trips as much as possible, help transition people into other modes of transportation where possible. And that's very easily done in urbanized areas because they have the infrastructure mainly in place. It's the rural areas that are struggling right now. And so how do we connect those towns, those cities, those rural locations to the urbanized areas with rail, with bus systems, with light rail systems and what have you. Infrastructure bill. This is kind of a cross section of the federal bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in 2021. And this is historic funding, generational funding that hasn't happened since the Eisenhower administration. But what's unique about this, typically when in federal transportation bills, you would see an 80-20 split. What that means is 80% would be dedicated to highways, 20% to transit. What we have here, you'll notice roads and bridges, 110 billion. Passenger and freight rail and public transit, 66 and 39. I think that comes up to about 106 billion. So it's almost a 50-50 split. That's the first time ever. And to me, that's exciting because the federal administration is realizing that we too need to move away from just driving cars and into other modes if we're going to combat climate issues and improve quality of life for people and air quality throughout our nation. So that's an exciting point. Also, right here, not a huge dollar amount for the entire nation, $1 billion, but reconnecting communities. So the federal government also realizes that highways, freeways disproportionately harmed some groups over others, divided neighborhoods, split families. And so there's an opportunity now to maybe eliminate some of those highways, turn them into boulevards with complete streets, or cap the freeway entirely, creating open spaces and parks on top of these freeways. So opportunities going forward, I think. And hopefully future bills will follow a similar path. SB1, I talked a little bit about it, but it was primarily focused on 4 assets: bridges, pavements, our ITS elements, and drainage systems or culverts. And so I will say, we just hit our 5-year anniversary of SB1, and we've already put out to construction over 4,000 projects to maintain and operate the system in a safe manner. So that's one of our priorities, to continue to maintain the system, because we're going to need it for movement of goods, but also the movement of buses and other modes. So accelerated bridge construction. These are some of the efficiencies, innovations that Caltrans is implementing today in our construction and design practices. So looking at opportunities, how can we minimize construction timelines? How can we minimize impacts to not only the user of the system, but minimize impacts and harms to the communities that are alongside our corridors? And some of these strategies, such as accelerated bridge construction, allows you to build portions of these bridges offsite, bring them in, and assemble them rather quickly. And we've done this on several projects throughout the state, where you're able to actually roll in very large decks and put them in place in matters of hours rather than months and weeks. Okay, some additional photos of some of the things we can do with this type of innovation. And even if you're familiar with the Bay Area, just to the San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge, we were able to use this methodology over a weekend to slide in a very large upper and bottom portion of the Bay Bridge and get the bridge reopened by Monday morning. So, and we use this technology also to move bridges, and also we used it with moving the space shuttle down in Los Angeles to move it to its final location. And just some additional bridges we've used this strategy on throughout the state. we've had some very good success with this type of innovation. We jump to pavements now, sustainable pavements. So it's an area that we are looking at very closely and implementing a lot of different strategies going forward with it when it comes to pavements. Some of the discussion we were having earlier, we were talking about in-place recycling of existing pavements. And there's estimates out there that the existing state highway system of 50,000 lane miles could potentially have close to 2 billion cubic yards of aggregates and materials. And so it makes sense to reuse this material rather than go out and remine aggregates, because that's not environmentally the right thing to do anymore, nor is it that easy to obtain a permit for mining. And so there's a lot of great benefits in moving forward with an in-place recycling and other types of sustainable pavements. We just completed a project here in Sacramento on I-5, which was a long life pavement project, and that's also a sustainable pavement on how can we repair the roadway and not have to come back for 40, maybe 50, maybe even 60 years with another rehabilitation, reconstruction of that roadway. So minimize those impacts to people and continue to allow people to move. Again, some of the benefits, reusing of materials, less transport costs, construction, typically can move a little faster, more efficiently. Maintenance and rehab and end of service life, you can extend that end of life with a lot of these sustainable pavement practices. This is just an example of something we're exploring. I know with Professor Harvey, environmental product declarations. Again, looking at where is cement coming in from? Where is the oil being produced? And what's that carbon footprint? And so as we start evaluating projects in the future, having what they call this as an EPD, having that available for us to determine what is the best strategy, the best contractor to utilize going forward is going to help us make those decisions. So again, everything comes down to what we do. We don't do it alone in a vacuum. Caltrans doesn't build projects or plan projects alone. As I've been talking, we utilize a lot of stakeholders. We bring people together, and even the funding, it requires federal funding, typically state funding. There's usually local funding that's brought to the table to deliver these large transportation projects. And so everything starts and ends with our partnerships. And this is a key priority of what we have at Caltrans also going forward. And the partnership that we have here with UC ITS is very, very, very valuable to us. So just a couple other things, other research we're doing. We have a division of research and innovation at Caltrans. And so they are doing a lot of very interesting technology type of research. This one here is called the Responder Project. It allows, in very rural areas, it allows our field people, whether they're construction or maintenance workers, to be able to communicate back to the main headquarters on any issues that they may identify and need assistance with. And so it utilizes satellite communication, Wi-Fi, cellular, and other means as well. Another area we partner with UCITS is wrong way driver. We've been seeing an increase in people going up the wrong off ramps, going up an off ramp instead of the other way around. And when these types of situations occur, they usually end very horrific because these people tend to be, what we've found is they tend to be impaired. So then they will travel in what they think is a slow lane, but going in the wrong direction, which is actually the passing lane. And you tend to have head-on collisions if we can't identify and stop them quickly. Some of these new strategies is to get their attention, such as lighted reflectors. We have signs that light up. We have flashing lights to catch their attention to hopefully get them to stop and pull over. We also are trying some communication technology where if somebody goes up the ramp in the wrong direction, it notifies our traffic management center, which we have the California Highway Patrol there as well, and we can dispatch the appropriate resources to hopefully stop something from happening. Also, we're experimenting and using variable speed and coordinated ramp metering on several projects to help with the flow of vehicles, but also a great opportunity with this technology is to allow for rapid transit, express buses to have a pass-through and allow them to move freely through the system and hold maybe single occupant vehicles. So there's more of an incentive to take an express bus rather than drive your own car to the same destination every day. So again, that concludes my presentation. But again, I just appreciate this opportunity to come and speak with you and have this engagement. It is just wonderful to be back at UC Davis with all of you. And I think we might have an opportunity for Q&A. Okay.
Anybody have some questions? Maybe stand up and speak loudly for those of us who are hearing impaired.
Sure. Thank you for your presentation and taking time for being here. First of all, just let me say, it's very surprising that at the very beginning of your presentation, you basically reminded everyone that important in definition of system approach. It's actually, I'm a second year PhD student. I work with Professor Jesus Barajas sitting over there. I'm a big person that who cares about traffic safety and transportation options provided to people. So I worked for other agency on traffic safety before. So it's the first time I heard a director remembers every word in the definition of safe system. That's I just want to show my respect there. My question is, you mentioned a number, roughly 4,000 traffic fatalities happened on California street network. As I know, like state transportation infrastructure is owned by state DOT, also the localities. And then my question is, what is Caltrans' agenda as state DOT going to work with the locality on improving traffic safety and addressing traffic fatalities in general?
Right. Excellent question. Thank you. So as we're implementing that safe systems approach, we are ready to roll out what's called the Caltrans Road Safety Action Plan. And that's a statewide plan that we've worked with many of our regional transportation agencies and partners throughout the state to help develop strategies on how we can eliminate fatalities and serious injuries. At Caltrans, we've established our own Vision Zero goal of getting to zero fatalities by 2050. And that's our goal. And in order to do that, as you know, we're going to have to redesign and re-engineer some of the infrastructure, but also education is a big component on that. And enforcement is another component of that as well. But working with our local agency on their local road system, we are identifying the top 100, I'll use the term dangerous intersections that have maybe the most crashes or accidents, and working with them, trying to provide them state and federal funding as well as what they can bring to help improve those intersections and reduce those conflicts between vehicles and human beings as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we decarbonize the transportation sector, we're switching over to EVs, which are getting heavier and heavier. Can you talk about how we can manage the increased risk and dangers from heavier vehicles like EVs and even just big trucks?
Yeah, we're definitely noticing the weight issue when it comes to big trucks, semi trucks, and those carrying freight. We're seeing that in order to, there's a law that trucks cannot be heavier than 80,000 pounds on our California roadways. So in order to keep that 80,000 pounds, you're going to have to reduce what you can actually carry because of the battery weight. So we are working with industry and others to identify other zero emission type of fuels, hydrogen being one of those as well, and seeing is trying to work with the OEM operators as well and the manufacturers. Are they moving more towards hydrogen, or are they really sticking with battery or electrified power? So it's still a work in process, but we do understand that there are some challenges with going full electric on semi trucks.
Thank you. Wonderful. That question. I actually have almost the exact same question, but is there, focusing on light duty vehicles, is there any clever regulatory policy that Caltrans is like considering, maybe just like limit the weight and size of these vehicles? Like we're gonna see a lot of like electric pickup trucks get on the market, and we were able to sit in one actually this last month, and these guys they're really heavy and they go very fast. We look at physics, force equals mass times acceleration. They can lead to a lot of casualties probably. So what is Caltrans' thoughts on that?
Yeah, from a safety standpoint, I agree with you. They're much heavier, not unlike big SUVs that you see out there right now. Much heavier, and they accelerate much quicker as well. We don't set the regulations, so that would be a legislative rule, but we educate our elected officials on where we see concerns, where we see issues, and then we hope that the legislators then move forward with enacting their regulations or laws that help us then implement them on the state highway system.
I had a question more related to ratings. Some of the ideas of why people get into crashes is excessive speed. So is there any idea of reducing speed limits in California, especially in urban areas? And maybe what are the implications or things that you've seen towards that? I saw some of the variability, and how you're going to manage that could be another question. I guess related was how that goes into like designing the speed limits, because we've learned that some of the speed limits are posted on people, like it's the other way around, like if they're going above the speed limit, then eventually, all the cars are going faster, so I'll just like go it up instead of down. So what would be like that idea?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there's a law in the books that say that the speed limit is based on the 85th percentile, right? And so luckily last year there were a couple bills that were passed into law that allow local jurisdictions to reduce their speed limits. And so we're working very closely with them to identify these hotspot locations first. Where could we lower the speed limit? Very supportive of doing that in some situations. Also, there's striping patterns that we can place on the pavement that can act and be perceived by a driver that they need to slow down. And so we're mimicking some of that, pilot testing some of that throughout the state, also to see if we can actually get the drivers to react differently and slow their speeds down on their own. So there's a lot of different strategies we're working in that space, but definitely if we can reduce those speed limits, that's where we're doing that as well.
I've recently become interested in like the concept of electric highways where trucks and buses could charge while they're driving on the roadway. Right now it's really just in like a proof of concept phase. I was wondering if you think that could become a reality in the future, and if there's any programs or plans that Caltrans think about that.
Yeah, I've actually had several industry groups approach us at Caltrans looking at placing some of these ITS elements as well as potential charging elements into concrete slabs where they could be placed, a whole array of them. along some of our highways. So we are looking at that. We haven't implemented anything, just as you mentioned, it's still I would say somewhere in the infancy stage still. But we are looking at that and seeing what's the feasibility of doing that.
First, thank you for your personal efforts for diversity.
Thank you.
The question is, if I understood correctly, you're kind of like waiting for OEMs to have an initiative on hydrogen. Would that mean how much money they're willing to put in to infrastructure? What kind of science do we need to make to prove how good, a net zero only water as a byproduct coming from renewable energies, more dense than gasoline, way lighter than batteries and diesel, how can we have an active role into making the transition faster? Because if some of us are here is because the only sector that is increasing global emissions is transportation. The world's burning. So that's one. And if there's time, how do you see Caltrans aligning with global sustainability goals? I think it's the first one that's more concrete would be great to hear. Thank you.
Well, I think we're doing very well in aligning with the climate goals that California has set, our administration and others have set. Caltrans is right in alignment and lockstep with them in trying to achieve those goals. With the hydrogen, it's not that we're waiting for them to bring money to the table. We want to understand if we invest in hydrogen, if we invest in providing a pipeline, hydrogen pipeline, let's say through the state within our right of way, within our infrastructure, will it be used? Is industry moving in that direction? I think they are, but they're not telling us.
It's like chicken and egg there.
Yes. And so we want to invest, but what we want to know that's going to be used.
And if I may, is there any law you could lean on to nudge private companies to share their information or planning? Because some are really open, like Toyota, right? So this is what we're doing. And they're number one seller in the US, right? Honda is definitely there, Kia,
Yeah, right. I would say continue working with all of you. You see ideas to you're probably more on a cutting edge than we are, and continue working with you to find those where are those opportunities.
These maybe too specific, but you talked a little bit about some of the recruitment efforts to match up the California demographics more with Caltrans. And I was wondering if what is that being done at a state versus state level or regionally or district? And then I also was wondering if retention is tracked as well. So looking at who is staying in the workforce at Caltrans over time. So I don't know. I was just wondering, I am curious if you have more details you could share with us about that.
Yeah, I'll try to share a little bit more. So I was fortunate to work in the Bay Area and then also in Los Angeles. Both those areas were very progressive as far as when it came to hiring, trying to be very inclusive with the people who live in those communities. And so utilizing a lot of those strategies, how do we reach out to those communities? And I'll give you an example of what I did in Los Angeles with this new Clean California program, which is the governor and legislature passed a couple of years ago. It allowed us to hire several individuals, hundreds of individuals statewide. In Los Angeles County alone, I went specifically to historically marginalized communities and did hiring events to bring people who were living in those communities, bring them on board so they could be part of our organization. And we were very successful in hiring over 300 people. That's one example. But we're also going out to all of the universities and colleges. And in Los Angeles, there are some colleges that tend to have higher rates of minorities and women. And we're targeting going there specifically. And we have what we call ambassadors within Caltrans that work with those universities and colleges and share information and meet with students and give them, share what do we do at Caltrans and would they be interested in coming to work for us in the future? So we're doing some of that stuff as well. And then you asked about retention, correct? Yeah, we do track retention. That is something where our attrition rates, people leaving and coming. What we've noticed, we've been in what's called a hybrid telework environment. So a couple days a week, we come into the office. The other days a week, most of the staff are working remotely. And that's been working well. But if you're a brand new, just let's say undergraduate that graduated and you're coming into an organization, at times it's very difficult to be part of that culture of that organization, get to learn all the aspects of the organization, get to know the people by just looking at a box on a screen on a Zoom meeting. And so we've noticed that we've had some new engineers and planners, after about 6 months, they don't feel like they're part of an organization and they've ended up leaving. So that's the reason why we try to bring our teams in together once or twice a week and have them, the actual full teams working together on a project, on an issue, so that there's that interaction, that human interaction between them.
Now that you mentioned a bit of the COVID hybrid situation, I was wondering if, or how does Caltrans get information on how, COVID has changed now in, like, let's say, kind of post-pandemic thing, and how do you get information on usage of the system from like the other entities, and you gather up and you tell us more about if there was actually an impact or maybe we're back to normal.
There has been an impact, a huge impact. I think prior to COVID happening, many of our transit systems were not running at full capacity. They were not generating the fare box revenues needed to keep that system operating. During the pandemic, we saw a lot of the ridership drop even further. In fact, only those who were using it were those individuals who were dependent on transit. That was their only needs. And so from an equity standpoint, we realized that immediately that we have an issue here and we need to address that issue. Let's say, I'm going to say post-pandemic, but we're still obviously it's going to be with us for years. Ridership has not returned. It has not returned. And in fact, there are more cars on our roadways than before COVID in many cases. And so we are working very closely. There's over 200 transit agencies in California. So we're working with all of them to find strategically what are the best routes. How do we maximize on what we currently have and ensure those who need the rides also have the rides. We're looking at how do we fund the operations of these transit systems, because very soon, within the next year or so, they're going to go off a cliff. A lot of the COVID funding, a lot of the federal funding is going to expire, and these transit agencies do not have the funding to continue to operate what they're doing. So we're working very closely with them and our legislators to determine other funding sources. How can we continue to fund the operations? Because that's very critical. If we are going to be serious about climate change, one of our main strategies is multimodal transportation and moving people out of driving a car by themselves and into other means of transportation. Yes, sir.
You mentioned there being more cars on roadways than pre-pandemic. What metric specifically is informing that observation?
So we have a lot of different ITS elements that are traffic counters and things of that nature that actually provide what the average daily traffic counts were. We have the historical data that we compare that to, and we're able to determine that we're seeing an increase of drivers on the road. And what's interesting, pre-pandemic, there were very defined times of the day. You had your morning and you had your evening commute. Now it's spread across the entire day. So people who may not have driven their car to go do a midday trip because maybe they're teleworking at home, they're running to the grocery store, they're running to the pharmacy, whatever it might be. And now you're getting more cars on our roadways, which now adds to, as I mentioned, more conflicts between cars and people, cars and bikes. And so it's becoming a much larger issue.
So would you say that demand has sort of spread out temporally and perhaps spatially as well?
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, absolutely.
So my question is about supporting infrastructure to support zero emission vehicles in the future. So I wonder, right now, most of the charging infrastructure for EVs or hydrogen infrastructure seems to be agencies like the Energy Commission or and they focus on as opposed to what highways or Caltrans owns the highway, prime real estate like coast areas, then definitely belongs as well. So I wonder, maybe like two questions in a way. What do you think is the role of Caltrans moving forward? Do you see changes in skill development as specific civil engineering skills to civil electrical skills moving forward? And I guess second question is, if you want to build something in like a coast area, it's not said anything it's supposed to be stable. Do you see private participation coming in isolated locations and see that that's coming from the Eisenhower days changing sometime in the future?
All excellent questions. And so first I'll say yes, Caltrans will have a strong role in the build out of the infrastructure. We're currently partnering with the Energy Commission, as you mentioned. They're the lead agency. We are the implementer of the infrastructure. So we, in partnership with them, we developed what's called the NEVI plan. So it's laid out the entire electrified infrastructure throughout the state on our state routes and corridors throughout the state. So the next part is now to implement that plan. We do envision doing a lot of public-private partnerships because there's going to be great opportunities there for the private industry to come to the table as well, because we don't have enough funding to build this whole infrastructure. We need them to also come and maintain and operate that for a period of time. You mentioned skill sets changing. Absolutely. I think skill sets are going to be changing. They're going to need to change, not just with EV infrastructure, but as you look at AI technology, when you look at everything across the board, all of our skills are going to have to evolve, adapt, and continue to improve, and we're going to have to continually be learning. So that's very important. I would say on our, let's say our trades skill folks, our maintenance folks and stuff, those who may be maintaining this infrastructure, we are going to have to put them through training classes and what have you so that they can build their skills, and we'll be looking at changing those classifications maybe into electronics technicians and things of that nature going into the future. I think I answered all your questions. Oh yes, rest areas. Yeah, rest areas seems like a logical choice to put these. I agree with you. Problem with rest areas is they were paid for through the federal government, and the federal government does not allow us to put anything in a rest area that we would charge cost wise, charge the consumer. And so therefore we're having some struggles right now with our partners in Washington, DC, trying to get them to either change regulations, change legislation, whatever is needed to allow rest areas to be used as safe zones for charging and staying overnight. People do that, they stay 8 hours or more, and sometimes it enhances safety on our roadways because we get people off the roadways so they can rest for a while. Very important. And we have them strategically located pretty much all over the state. So it's a logical choice, I think, as well, to utilize those locations. We're looking at park and ride locations. We're looking at other locations too as options for EV charging. But thank you. Great questions. Yes, hi.
So thank you for your presentation. To improve the connectivity of the California, it will be very important to balance of various transportation types. So since you are at the top of the DOT, so it'd be great to hear that what kinds of the project is actually going on. So for example, I'm aware that there is an expansion project of the LA airport and Sacramento. And then the high-speed rail installation is still going on between the San Francisco to LA, such thing. So I assume that in your mind, this two project has to be done successfully to improve the connectivity in California. So it'll be great to hear that from.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't oversee the high-speed rail or the expansion of the LAX, but we do participate. Obviously, we provided them state funding through some of our programs to help them with that. Those are very critical to have that connectivity, just as you said. We're also funding projects to double track and triple track some of the commuter rail services. Most of those commuter rail services utilize track that's owned either by Union Pacific or BNSF. And so in order to double and triple track in some areas, it will allow freight to continue to move, but you can also get much better headways when it comes to commuter rail service as well. So we're funding a lot of projects in commuter rail. We're funding a lot of projects with transit organizations. We were talking earlier about some of our electrification of transit buses. So we are funding a lot of that as well for LA Metro and many of the transit organizations around the state as well. So they can move from whether it's natural gas or diesel into electrified buses. So there's a lot of things. We're not necessarily expanding our highway system anymore. At least in urban areas, there may be some rural locations where it's still necessary based on the system hasn't been built out, or we're looking to improve the movement of goods. So we're like in the Central Valley, we're looking at a truck only lane to just carry freight through that and remove any conflicts between trucks and other vehicles on that roadway. So our focus has shifted completely from the days of 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, where it was capacity expansion, it was building freeways. You know, we do want to maintain what we have because it's necessary. We're going to need it to move people either on buses. We're going to need it to move freight. So we still need to maintain it. That will always occur. But as far as building it out larger and larger, I think we're pretty much done.
You mentioned earlier, I guess, the importance of rural areas, and I guess I'm curious to hear what are Caltrans' next steps to either focus, I guess in their focus of rural areas, and how any projects, I guess, are happening that could assist in the goals of zero emissions or equity in those areas.
Yeah, thank you. And as I was just mentioning about the types of projects we're investing in. So in our rural areas, we are looking at right now, there's not a lot of transit connectivity between small towns and even towns to the big urban areas. And so we're working with different transit operators, developing a strategic plan on how can we connect all of these communities together and connect them to the job centers, and that tends to be the Bay Area and Southern California in a lot of cases. And so how do we connect them to that? So it's by transit, by bus, but it's also, there's a lot of privately owned commuter rail services out there too. So you have Metrolink in LA, you have ACE train that runs from Stockton to San Jose. We're looking at expanding the ACE train from Stockton to Merced, so it will tie in to the high-speed rail when the high-speed rail reaches Merced by 2030. So all of these projects, they take time, but we have the vision, we have the strategic plan to develop and start funding the planning processes, the environmental process, and then the design process to get us to construction.
I'm sorry. So I guess in rural areas, I was thinking that, well, I'm a cyclist very often. The shoulder width in a lot of rural areas is very small or non-existent. So like maybe what is your thought on, or maybe like having, or if you have a project to help rural areas at least increase the shoulder width that could help even cyclists and pedestrians, have an alternative and which is safer than
Absolutely.
walking the road.
Yeah, and that's a priority of ours too. And I know I've been talking about transit and commuter rail, but complete streets and active transportation. Ensuring there's a lot of rural communities, they don't have sidewalks. And so how do we help fund those types of projects that provide safe passage for people who are walking? Also riding a bike, there's no bike lanes. And being here in Davis, I rode a bike every day when I was going to class, and it's a necessity here. And I continue to ride also. So there's 4 classes of bike lanes, as you probably know. And there's class 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm not a big proponent of class 3. I think that's just sharing the lane that a car uses. I am really pushing class 4 and class 1 type bike lanes. They're protected. They keep cyclists separated from vehicles. So there's no necessary interaction that could accidentally happen. They happen obviously at intersections, but not as a cyclist is going down the road. So we are doing a lot of work. We just invested over $1 billion in active transportation projects this year alone.
How does that compare to other states' expenditures on active transportation projects then?
Yeah, no, great question as well. I will say Washington is doing very well too. I compete with Washington. Sometimes they compete with us. We look at each other and feed off one another. They're doing very good. I will say, as you go towards the center of the country, everyone's looking at California. They're looking to us as leaders. What are we doing in California? What happens here? We usually do it first, and then it spreads across the nation. And so that's what I'm seeing as well. So compared to other states, we are leaps and bounds ahead of them at this time. Still have a long way to go, but we're still recent. Thank you.
I have a question, a little change topics. I was really interested in the wrong-way driver project that you mentioned a little bit about.
Yeah.
Is there, I'm curious if there's just like more background on that you might have about like, why is that happening? I remember when I first came to California, I was really confused by the roadway system. I was like, is it like some design questions? Are they majority like drunk, like impaired driving issues, or like what is that? And can you explain a little bit more about the solutions that Caltrans was thinking about?
Yeah, so again, it goes back to that safe systems approach, and where both the user and the owner have to take responsibility. And so as we started seeing this increase of wrong-way drivers in the state, we started identifying where these, what we call hotspots might be. And we went out, investigated, and so, yeah, there's signage that may not be as bright or vibrant as the latest technology is today. And so we went out and started upgrading the signs and doing things to the striping and the infrastructure out there to make it very visible to anyone who isn't impaired that this is not the right way to travel. We also looked at the geometrics of the off-ramps. Some of them, it's from a person who doesn't know the area, it may look like the right direction to get onto the freeway. And so we realized that there's geometric concerns. And so in some of those cases, we're changing the geometrics of the off-ramp so it doesn't seem obvious that's the way you should get onto the roadway. So we're taking responsibility, but also on the user side, what we are hearing statistically from the law enforcement agencies is that many, I'm not going to say 100%, but many are impaired one way or another as they go on. There's also been, elderly drivers who are confused, and that's where I say if they're confused, that's our responsibility also. So make it better so they're not confused. Sure. Hi.
Yeah, we were shown the below upfront. I noticed that you have a 50 billion for climate change protection and about 24 for environmental cleanup. So I was wondering, why are those separate? What kind of projects those resources are used for? And like, what is the time frame windows that you have for using that budget for the implementation?
So I didn't catch the first part, I'm sorry.
My question is, why do you have both budgets like separate for the climate change protection and the environmental cleanup? What kind of projects do you fund with these resources? And the second question is, what is the windows? What is the time frame windows you have for using that?
Yeah, so the climate change budget, it's really not a budget just for climate change. It's our transportation budget, and what we are saying is we're dedicating a portion of that funding to address the climate issues, and that may be not only environmentally sustainable parts of a project, but also resiliency of the project. Right? You're talking about extreme storms, extreme weather conditions, and how do we address that? The environmental cleanup, that is a separate fund. It's specific for very specific locations where we may have hazardous materials or something that are located in the state. There are some Superfund locations in California as well. And so there is funding specifically to continue to monitor and clean those locations. I'm not sure I answered the question.
And what is the time frame you have for using that money?
Usually, you have a 3-year time frame to use the money, typically.
Coming up on the 1 hour mark here. Tony, I know Tony's got a lot of stamina, but anybody have any last 1 or 2 questions?
I know a lot of us are looking to graduate soon. Any advice for people that are applying to Caltrans for work?
Honestly, where we're headed is exciting. These are exciting times for transportation. Not only the amount of funding, as I was showing you, coming into transportation, but how we can really change people's lives for the better. Right? And I just, to me, that's what's really resonating with me right now. I've done a lot of the engineering work, I've done all of that, but where I want to leave a legacy is how do I improve people's lives going forward? And I think if what you're doing here today, coming to Caltrans, you have a great opportunity to impact in a positive way people in California. So I would welcome all of you.
All right, thank you very much.